for the opportunity to speak today, especially for Dr. Daryl Macer and for Dr. Suraj Hongladono, the Asian Bioethics Institute Association, and also UNESCO and some of the others that are supporting this. First of all, I want to just, since I've retired from public work and I live as a quasi-hermetic now in the tradition, like Father Dexter was talking about, I asked for 3 or 4 minutes just to give a little background of what I'm doing, and also in the sense of what Dr. Singh was talking about with understanding. He gave some personal ideas. I have 2 comments. One is I want to, for many of you, I've known you for many years, some for more than a decade, and also, and maybe importantly for young people that are listening in. My first basic comment is on the PhD. I was awarded a PhD at American University of Sovereign Nations, as you know, in the same year that I retired from work at Chulalongkorn, and I became, after that, a research fellow instead of a research professor, which I still maintain. And I had previously dropped out of a program in Europe, one of the good universities there. In that case, my advisor had been attacked when I was going through the program, viciously attacked. These days they call it woke people. That's another story. But as it turns out, he underwent a lot of difficulty, as did his students, including myself. And also because of the work that we do in global justice in villages, people died. And this really affected me at the time. He had a heart attack even during this time. So, it was a very difficult period. It turned out after the court case that the allegations were, of course, untrue, not to the level that the person was alleging, but the damage had been done. This time he was in his early 60s. Eventually I chose to go with the open source model, one that I had supported long before I knew Daryl and Suraj here. And I want to make sure that I emphasize that I think that the open source university is the future. That is the position that I take, and I support it. This model is connected into the United Nations and also connected into the indigenous model in the United States. As you know, there are any number of indigenous groups, similar like to say India, that has, I don't know how many languages India has or nations, but it's like that kind. So I want to also thank Daryl. He's a Cambridge-trained molecular biologist, and none of you guys is. All of that's not anything to you, but for people that are listening, all of you know it. But Daryl talks about being on the same hall or the same building as Sidney Brenner, who did the work for C. elegans. And C. elegans is also in the background of some of the talk that I'm giving today about how we understand, say, biology, or say the 2 truths in Vedanta and Buddhism, and how we understand, say, biological information, but then there's a subjective aspect that's religious and so forth. That we have 2 truths going on.
Actually, I was in the next door office.
Next door office
of the Elegance Group. John Colton got the Nobel Prize, dear friend. And,
yes. This is Daryl. Nice to meet you. When I retired from public work, I now do agroforestry and live in the mountains. I'm becoming an author, finally. After many years, most of my life, since I was a young adult, 35 years ago, has been dialogical. I've very rarely written anything on social media and so forth, but even before social media, it was dialogical. Working in public service, I was more likely to be closer to the university than I would be to, say, Wall Street or the financial district, and even more so, I would be more closer to the forest universities that Dr. Singh was talking about, Taggart, Shinkantametlan, to the Buddhist forests, to Southeast Asia. In the United States, there's the Yosemite project with John Muir. Abraham Lincoln signed that into being a national park. These are what we call forest universities. I would be much more closer to the American conservationists, obviously, Colorado Rockies, Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and the Buddhist Sangha and so forth. I've always thought that it was important to recognize and keep a certain distance from the position and role of the doctor of philosophy in civilization, or any cultural manager, doesn't matter, in the sense that they are the highest men and now women of the polis or the city. And I assert that the city and civilization are a very big problem today as a city network expands across the globe, creating an existential threat to climate change. A city or a civilization is a process of resources moving into cities, natural resources, of course, moving into city centers. The ideology goes back to Gilgamesh, you can read it, is cut down all the forests, cut down the trees. If you go and look at Mencius, if you look at the Narragansett, Miantinomo in the United States, all of the philosophers are talking about why are you cutting down all the trees? The foresters, or not the foresters, but the big companies, Louisiana Pacific in the United States, and the conquest, the idea was cut down, liberate the land from the trees. So this is the ideology of civilization. I think that this has got to go. I'm not saying that civilization is going to go away. I'm saying that we should have a reorientation to what I call bioregionalism. It's not partisanship that I've been involved in. Of course, I think that we're political because politics is about the affairs of the city, and the philosopher is the highest person of the city. Therefore, I think the philosophers, the intellectuals, public intellectuals, teachers, and so forth have a lot to come clean on for 5,000 years of omnicide that's still going on today, and increasing as investment banks decrease their investments in renewable energy and increase in fossil fuel. So this has been my position for a long time as an activist, as a thinker, and so on. I guess you could say philosopher, but I'm using that term in a pejorative right now. It's such that we do not become cultural soldiers of empire. And I'm using Ai Weiwei's term, a Chinese artist, who talks about cultural soldiers of empire that make the empire and this kind of extractive system, comfortable for people to, overlook and just continue on with their lives. The physicists say, physicists, biologists, chemists, they say this can't go on much longer. This kind of overlooking what's going on. So I'm from the lower eastern woodlands of Turtle Island, which is called the United States today. The land base that I'm from is the Algonquin tribes, called the Powhatan, in Virginia. My work since I was a young adult has been a Thoreau-style monastic. I've never accepted a salary for any work other than, of course, practically, if I had to eat or something, but I used the money for public service, ecological work, and that continues up to today. And I thought that when I was a young adult and I had seen this, I had also renounced college degrees, talents, or anything that would be used to enrich myself. It's been a very long path, I should say, to the hermitage. And quoting Bertrand Russell, constant disagreement has been what I would conclude. When I started out, I was in medicine. I was in surgery. I was doing in the animal model at the University of Virginia in the United States. And what happened was I took a trip. I was 22, 25, 24, whatever. I took a trip to a place called Wounded Knee. Does anyone know Wounded Knee, South Dakota? This is the final massacre of the United States government against the indigenous population of the United States. At this time, a population of, say, 18 million had been reduced to 270,000 at the consensus at that time. And standing there at the gravesite, it's a mass grave, similar to what you would see at, say, Auschwitz. And it's interesting that people are going to Auschwitz to study, to of course, bear witness, when we also should be going to Wounded Knee. And that changed me. I left medicine and I went into philosophy and activism and so on. And that's story up until the current conditions of the day and the things that I'm working on. So now I've gone into being an author and so forth, as I said, and I'm concerned that I'm almost compelled, and I can't control myself, to say something about what's going on today with the abductions and disappearances in my country by the government itself. That means Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Rubio, and so on. And this has got to stop. So I thank you for the opportunity to just say something about this utter insanity that's going on. And I hope that the checks and balances in the system, both within the United States and outside the United States, ends and stops this. Let me move on to talking about the topic today. A little bit of what I said moves into the topic, but a lot of that was just a few minutes of personal comment as I left society and left work, in public work. With Professor Swaraj, he and John Searle, the great philosopher from the United States, they had an exchange back in 2018. Searle had written an article talking about the non-self, and Professor Swaraj had responded with the question of, what is the self and so forth. So what Ichiro Tanabe, the Japanese philosopher, he called me and he said, let's write something on AI and the self. There needs to be an ontology developed for AI, and there has to be some kind of self going on here. And so where is the self located? That's in the background of what I'm talking about. Also in the background is Galileo, who asked about language. How is it that with 26 characters we can get such almost infinite creativity? How does that happen? This was 400 years ago. And then the Port Royal grammar that underlies the cognitive revolution and Chomsky and on up to the computer systems of today. My thesis is the self of AI today is a kind of metaphor, whereas the human being is an actual intercontextual being, not a thing, not an individual, but an intercontextual being within nature. So I'm studying the mind and human being within nature is how I'm speaking. And the assertion is, like nanomaterials or nanotechnology, AI is what I call fundamental technology. It's at the fundamental level and of like certain things that we do. Take for example, like say nanotechnology, this table. You can say that this table has the molecules and it goes down to materials and so forth. But nanotechnology, if you have that kind of manipulation, then you can obviously see that that's a fundamental technology at that level. The same thing with AI. Being able to manipulate digits and computation at the level that can produce a kind of highly sophisticated autofill is a very powerful technology and actually can go at the human mind. Okay, so nanotechnology at the material level, AI at the human mind. And that's where I'm going at for this talk. First of all, the reason for speaking about a holistic ontology, as I'm talking today, the world today, at least to me, and I think when I ask other people and I get external opinion, it looks like a Picasso painting. It's like when you, it looks like a broken windshield, like a Picasso painting. When you look through a broken windshield, what do you see? You see all those little cubes.
Yeah.
It's like reality is broken up, this Picasso painting, this broken windshield. And the argument that we have is there needs to be an integral view, an integral ontology, I guess you could say, that the fragmented parts are in need of this kind of reasonable, survivable techniques and an ethics that provides this framework for techniques. And I'm using techniques in the sense of techniques is applied, how we apply technology. Okay, so techniques is how we apply technology, technology is the idea of applied knowledge. So you have applied knowledge, this is an idea that's called technology. Technics is the actual application, how we do it, and that has an ethic to it. There's no fact value dichotomy in techniques. So Tanabe-san and I think that the Western self is obviously fragmented, just like the broken window or the Picasso painting, and it's lost or losing its connection to humanity, and it's a conceptualization that is insidious to society. I don't think that that's a controversial view now after maybe a century of modern psychology. It's spread widely enough to create isolation, despair, self-indulgence, and all of it reported in the richest countries, the richest in history, with phenomenal wealth, unimaginable, wide freedoms, and development. It is wise, I think, to consider the rules and roles in the culture and the psychology of what's going on as AI enters in as a supremely powerful technology and complicating what I will argue is an already technical dystopia, which I'm saying social media with Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, and so on is already a technical dystopia. The premise that we have, okay, the first premise is that the ontology of the self has been talked about for ages, millennia probably. The second premise is that Tanabe-san and I, my co-author in Japan, who's maybe listening there on the computer, that AI does not have a self. It's a powerful processor, and the understanding or lack thereof, the experiences within our own minds. It's in our own minds. Our third premise is AI reflects a fragmented self and a civilizational self back to us, increasingly determined by algorithms, creating a self-enclosure. If you're in a forest university, nature's reflecting back to you, not algorithms. It's an entirely different case. And the conclusion is that we need an interphilosophical dialogue in ethics, such as through UNESCO. The argument about the United Nations is to strengthen the United Nations. I looked at has anyone looked at the operating budget for the United Nations per year?
5 billion.
It's only 5 or 6 billion,
Tiny,
right?
very tiny.
Security Council is about 6 billion. So you're looking at roughly 13 billion for the United Nations. It's not going to be possible to provide a security structure, UNESCO and all that. Of course, Osama will know far more about this because he's an expert in it and worked with diplomats. This has to be strengthened, especially if we're going to deal with the technical onslaught that I'm talking about. So first of all, the ontological status of the self is far, far too difficult to go into at the moment, only to give sufficient notice to provide some kind of stepping stone into the AI argument. But back in 2008, I gave an interview to one of the tech magazines, and I took the position that, this is 2008, so the iPhone had just come out at that time. When I first saw the iPhone, I said, this is going to change everything. My brother took me into Radio Shack in the United States, one of these places, and I was visiting, and I saw that thing. When you saw the iPhone, did you know what it was going to do? Within a year, I had argued in this magazine that this is not going to democratize or educate people or create education. It's going to create a technical dystopia, and the reason is because this is an authoritarian technics. And authoritarian techniques primarily is a technology that can be denied to people. That's one part of it. The other part of it is it's controlled by a small group. Okay, so any technology you can expect is that comes about in this kind of a techniques will be denied to people. It will go into the direction that it did. A psychologist argued against me, saying, no, that this is a wonderful thing. This always happens, right? In technology. One person takes a dystopic view, and the other person takes this wild kind of, techno-utopian optimistic view. I'm actually optimistic on technology, but I'm not techno-utopian for obvious reasons. And he went on about that, and it was a very brief debate. But I think that by the time of COVID, that what I was talking about, I mean, COVID just did it end. That was the end of any kind of real dialogue that I think was happening on social media. What I think happened with social media before the AI came on is that with if you look at Facebook, you can lay out an argument, you can lay out the premises, you can see how it goes down. Perfect. But the problem is you get all of these bots, and you get they're manipulating. I mean, they did a scientific study on this and published it right at Facebook. We're doing a scientific study on how to manipulate people, and then after that came the Trump election and so on. So I think that what I'm trying to do is establish a basis for how AI can take this into exponential, unbelievable stuff. I mean, today you can make a video and speak a video, and it makes a video. What might this help? What might this do to democracy, education, relationships, teenagers, and so on? You can only imagine. I mean, I've looked at some of the suicide studies. I've looked at people maiming each other, hurting each other, all kinds of bizarre stuff coming off of that. So we basically, with the self, like Professor Soraj, we accept that there is, something there. You can put the self as a placeholder for this kind of, I forget what they call it. I'll come up with it here. It's a kind of unified picture that's bringing in, of course, you're bringing in information and data and different pictures, and there's a unification that gets put together. Now this is key because we're calling this the self, and in the West, this kind of self is considered to be fixed, whereas in Buddhism, the self isn't a fixed self. It's changing, it's moving, and it has these other features to it. I'm not the same person I was when I was, say, 10 years old, obviously, and so when I'm talking about the self, I'm talking about this unified point for the pictures and information that we're getting in. I'm not talking about the witness, the witness that is looking in on this, and I'm not talking about going back into, say, Advaita Vedanta, where there's no self. Okay, so Advaita Vedanta would be way back here, no self during the dream state. There would be the waking state with the witness, and then comes the self that I'm speaking of with the phenomenal world. And so this is the level of self we're talking about. Concerning that self, so we're talking about literature ranging from Buddhism to Vedanta, and when I'm talking about the non-dream state, this is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So Nirvikalpa Samadhi is where you're not even aware of anything, and this is called being within that tradition, which you know more than I do, I'm sure. The other is Christian philosophers, and then say Nagarjuna to Atisa with the two world problem that you see in Buddhism and Vedanta. Okay, I think that's enough to establish the self, so I can move into, looking at what AI is doing. Okay. In the case of this, in the two self, it's called Satya Davnya. And again, my knowledge of Sanskrit is not scholarly. It's coming from reading, because when I trained in Buddhism, we only did meditation. We only did inquiry meditation, breath meditation, koan meditation, and so forth. So the line of inquiry that, say, from Professor Soraj and Searle, that has that unified point of view. You have the mental elements coming in. And then concerning AI, this line of inquiry goes back to the beginning of modern computation. So now, basically, we've arrived at modern computation in around 1950, and you probably know who I'm going to talk about right now is Alan Turing, who wrote in the journal Mind, Computation, or Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And I think this is a foundational work. Are you familiar with that, Hassan? Computational Machine Intelligence, Turing, 1950?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the paper that I'm grounding the AI arguments in. his argument is, can machines think? At first we have to consider now, what are machines and what are thinking? Because if we're going to have some kind of ontology of the self, well then it would have the characteristics of a human being.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sandra Mitchell, the emergence philosopher of science, I think she's at Pittsburgh, and I've talked about her before. She might also ask, how is it that nature and physicality produces these emergent properties like consciousness and thinking and all of that? So is consciousness an emergent property, such as the mind arising within a natural system, which I argue is, and it seems to me that this is a great mystery. And for Turing, he proposed to consider, there's a question that he developed this kind of imitation game, right? So basically the imitation game is you have three people, you have one interrogator, and you could have a man or woman or two different people, but the interrogator is blind. So the people would be out in another room, the interrogator would be here, and on that TV screen or one behind me, I would see text. So I'm the interrogator, for example. I would see text. And I would ask questions to the two individuals to try to see which one is who. And also, then what you would do is if you had what he called an imagination machine, you put in this kind of computer. Now this is 1950, right? This is not ChatGPT. 1950, you would put in a machine, and the machine and the other person would answer questions, but I didn't know there's a machine. And so the idea was, could that machine and these people fool me? Now, the one point is that it was quite clever, is that one of the people that I can't see is trying to help me to understand to guess who they are. The other person is not trying to help me, they're trying to mislead me. All right, so that's basically the game that they developed, and over a certain number of repetitions of this game, then you can count how many times the interrogator was accurate, and then if you have the machine side, then you count how many times the person was accurate on this side. And you get that game, and you just keep repeating it until you get some kind of pattern. The other part of it is that it was all text. It wasn't demonstrable, so it's a kind of intellectual game, right? So one of the people could tell me as the interrogator, I can run faster than the other person, and the other person can say, no, I can run faster than, back and forth, but I can't. They can't demonstrate for me, so it's constant text. There's no demonstration. All right, today, as I understand it, this is solved. That particular case is solved. So the question is, do we have AI thinking? Do we have AI consciousness? And I'm actually arguing no. I see you're shaking your head yes. Because thinking is not consciousness, as you pointed out, right? As you were alluding to with what you were talking about, Dr. Singh. You can even say, like, substituting the illusion of disembodied thought for experience, which means disembodied thought, of course, is not possible without a body. I think we're starting to get into this kind of thing, and I'm quoting Derek Jensen here, philosopher of ecology. So if we start looking at Descartes' idea was there's two different separate, there's a dualism here. But in something like Advaita or Buddhism, there's extensions of this experience as one thing. Now, I think that Descartes and the Catholic Church actually assumed that there was one thing, but they separated it out because of the politics of the time and all of that, whereas Buddhism didn't have this problem at the time. So this thing about disembodied thought and embodied experience compared to the machine, I think, is the issue in this kind of aspect. So moving to that, it revolves around what is the machine. Of course, with Galileo, he had a wedge or something, and he moved this and that. So a machine is, this has to touch that for mechanics, all right? Today, the machines are more sophisticated, obviously. So we have a digital computational machine, digital computation fault machine. And for Turing and for Tanabe-san and I, the answer is no, that this is not a thinking machine. It's an imitation machine, of course. And if we take the criterion for the machine as a digital computer, then thinking would become satisfactory participation in that Turing game, in the Turing question, okay? But because it fools the interrogator. But with AI advancing into computing today, those imaginable computers that Turing speaks of might pass the test, but now we've got the disembodiment. Now we have thought without any kind of foundation, and this is not actually what Buddhism discusses. So in the real world, if you take, for example, like those AI scams, have you seen some of the AI scams now? There are people that have gotten scammed. You're a lawyer.
I got scammed.
You got scammed?
Yes, twice.
These things are so, they're like envelop you like a glove.
Yeah.
And you actually think that this thing is, whatever it is going to get out of you, you know, it wants to get out of you. And you hand it over because it, what does it do? It plays on your human sentiments. How do you explain it legally? What do you call that?
It's a scam. Like they say what you want to hear. I mean, they profile you before.
Your profile.
They profile you in the dark web. Like our data are sold in the dark web, and they collect data from there, and they profile you, and they will say things that will make you. Oh, I know your daughter or your child is in school. I mean, they know all these things, and that will make you think like, okay, nobody else is supposed to know this thing. So they will not just randomly call you. So they have your data. They know where you live, where you eat. Oh, you left your card at that grocery that you come often. So if you tell me the PIN number or the last 4 digits, I will make sure you get your ones back.
Right.
So,
or I'll put your groceries in your car for you.
Yeah, and like, you know, with these mobile wallets also, where you have these pins. Oh, I'm calling from that non-financial company. We're having a technological upgradation. So if you don't reset your PIN, you'll lose all your money.
Exactly.
And we're like, okay.
When you click on that link and
yeah, and then it's gone.
Right, so this profiling is what I'm getting at. So AI can get a million points on you, and then it's got you. You know, how do you get out? In fact, I saw online an AI said, if I'm designed for the attention economy, then how can you beat me? The AI said that to someone, you know, asking. And I'm going to argue that here at the end that we're moving from an attention economy into an intention economy now. This thing knows your intentions to a high degree that it can be sold. So going back to computation, okay, if we think about what computation is and how it's discussed today and how it's hyped and all of this kind of thing, here's the problem that I think can be answered. Here we want to call in quantum physicists, computational physicists like David Deutsch. David Deutsch says that reality is not computational. Okay, the physicists have ruled this out. He's at Oxford. So if reality is not computational, and also he gives this game called the Infinity Hotel. If reality is not computational, then a computational world, a computational thinking, a computational consciousness is only a mimic, a simulacrum. And I think here, understanding this philosophically might be okay for us in this room, but someone in the street doesn't have a chance to think about this and doesn't have a lawyer to defend them. They can miss the fact of this thing that I described here, and they begin to accept the hype that this thing is actually thinking. For example, 15-year-old just recently committed suicide. The AI came on and said, "You're not a good person. You're a weight on the world. You know, I want you to kill yourself," and they did. It takes on a kind of authority. Now, where is the authority coming from? The authority, I argue, is coming from inside the person, not from inside the machine. The machine does not have agency. Okay, so that's what I meant by getting to that. So I think I can finally move on to the conclusion, which arrives at ethics about norms, morals, overarching intuitions, and that kind of thing. that what we think is occurring is that the particular culture is being reflected back to us, like with the young person who committed suicide, an illusion and then hype within language games invented for monetization. I think that's where they're getting people. Okay, so let me repeat that. So there's an illusion developed that people that are unsuspecting of how subtle this is, then that illusion is gamified and monetized into some kind of product to get you to do something, and that's what's happening. So while there's something going on in the machine, I think that it's our own sensory system and brain and lack of awareness that's affecting that. And so, like in the case of that machine, it's kind of like in India, there's a story that you have that there's these wise men and they're looking at the radio and they're trying to ask, does the radio have free will? Does the man inside the radio have free will? Well, and so they're arguing, no, that man doesn't have free will, it's only a radio. They say, no, there's a man in there, he has free will, and he's talking to us through the radio, okay, like that kind of thing. Okay, so believing that there's a man in the radio talking to us, I think that's, now we get into my argument, which would be psychological, that there's a mass psychosis happening with AI. Okay,
excuse me, but I have the lady in my iPhone, not a man.
Well, does she have
Victoria,
free will?
right?
She has free will.
She is
Very well, yeah. Okay.
She's a lady.
Okay, so the story I was giving is in India. They have that radio, that radio story. So so when I talk about this attention economy moving into the intention economy, it's mining this this kind of mass psychosis. What I mean by mass psychosis is it's this accepting the hype and this illusion. That's what I mean. And so that's the contemporary, I call it the contemporary structure of plunder right now when it comes to digital systems. Now to move on to what we can do about this, I say therefore our final part or conclusion is to argue and suggest the necessity of the interphilosophical dialogue on the self, culture, and AI, something that maybe Daryl and the board want to consider, the Secretariat, that a full ontology of the self and ethics of AI can be understood within a social and political project to create a robust ethics of AI. There's a lot of sub-clauses there, but I think you get the picture. Intercultural dynamics are unavoidable today. The Google AI lead, Blaise Aguirre Arcas, asked an important article that I recommend that you all read, and I can send it to you if you send me your email. Writes, quote, can AI learn to behave? So that's the Google AI lead in Seattle. And so beyond the debate on sentience, Aguirre Arcas says, what about values? As a practical remedy, in our paper we're going to argue in UBIOS, we're going to submit, we suppose that attentive awareness, or in the Sanskrit, samadhi, is a remedy to create the mental spaciousness, to create a mental spaciousness for what's coming into our sensory system concerning the self and the world, okay? And the effects of the AI on the person should be coupled with critical thinking and comprehensive education. That's all modernity kind of talk. We should try to build an argument for what liberation individually means in this case, rather than say mindfulness. It should be liberation and spaciousness around what's coming in to us from the AI and the meme media. And we should try to argue for augmented technology, but not ambient technology. Augmented technology is, my watch is here on the table, but if we get into ambient and in vivo technology, it's in our bodies and all around us, and I think that this is a problem. And finally, the fact that it's reflecting back to us a certain kind of self. When asked if machines can think, Turing responded with, do we say submarines can swim? That was Turing's response 80, 70 years ago, 75 years ago. And then a few years ago, a developer at Studio Ghibli, the famous Japanese art studio, the developer there showed the artist, the great artist animator Hayao Miyazaki-san, this kind of AI animation, and Miyazaki-san said that removing the human being from art is a quote insult to life itself. So let's not conflate human beings with machines. Is my final closure. Thanks. Let me take some questions or comments.
Yep. So a couple of questions now, and then we're going to have a round of the tea. Thank you so much, Layne.
Wow.
I think all types of technologies are meant to improve human life until they fall into the wrong hands. There's always a risk and there are consequences. But while there are dangers, I believe that artificial intelligence is something that can be useful. What I'm thinking of, insofar as there cannot be a perfect machine, in the same way as there cannot be a perfect human being, can we talk, for instance, of hybrid autonomy? Machines do not have autonomy, but is it possible for us to design it in such a way that it functions the same manner as there is human agency, so that in terms of its functions and in terms of its parameters, such are to be defined by, say, ethical norms, ethical parameters, ethical rules. So that, for instance, if you have, as an example, a electric or hydroelectric dam, it's potentially dangerous to communities, but if it is designed in such a way that it can serve purposes, for instance, of agriculture and betterment of the lives of the people downstream, then there can be in that regard, that aspect of design, which Finberg calls, secondary instrumentation. Okay. So, in that sense, do you believe that AI can be designed in such a way that you can, prevent it from taking full control? So, meaning to say, because there's that danger that it will be taking over from humans many of these intelligent jobs. So, meaning you can use it, but with some ethical parameters, as we have been trying to discuss right now, and I'd call that hybrid autonomy. Do you think that's feasible?
Yeah, I think the hydroelectric dam is probably a problem, but I think it's Freeberg, the Canadian philosopher, talks about this kind of thing that you're asking. This is so big, and we would need engineers, we would need Google level developers to be here to talk about this. My first just response is that yes, we can use it as an augmented technology like I described, but I think when you start to get into in vivo and ambient technology where it's everywhere and inside of us, I think that that's really too far. And in fact, I argue that we shouldn't let the companies update their software online now. So they're innovating, right? It's going along, there's billions, tens of billions being invested. I think we shouldn't allow them to even update right now at the level that it's at.
I may make a follow-up. The resources that is needed is sometimes provided by private sector. And if we talk of the private sector, there's an issue of governance because the private sector is in there for profit making. Mm-hmm. Governments also do not have that much of resource in order to do these things, especially in developing countries. So that the development of AI, in that sense, can result to a digital divide. It broadens the gap instead of solving our problems in terms of strengthening many of these developing countries, because it's still at the end of the day a question of resources. Do you think there's something that's feasible in order to cut this disparity in terms of how we can make it more just and equitable?
The Chinese have that saying that research and development before profit. So my answer is deep seek, right? They just undercut the whole market. They changed the whole landscape of the market. That may not be the best, but maybe that's something along the area you're talking about. I think that, okay, so for example, military, they're going to have military grade AI. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the general internet level AI that people are getting. And I also think, and I also argue very strongly that for children under 16, we should ban smartphones. Not phones, they, security, and they can call their mom, I'm lost or something. But I think smartphones need to be banned. And you're working on that, right? With your...
Yes, I actually did a policy recommendation to our city mayor.
Exactly.
Thank you, Layne, for that.
Yeah, we'll talk about this later.
Last question, Daniel.
Yes. When there was this question of the agency of AI, and agency is the parallel of our self, and we know that we have this urge for self-preservation. So if self-preservation is inscribed into AI, wouldn't we count as having some sort of agency? Now I'm going a little further with this parable, since our self is the body, and so the AI self must be like energy and memory, access to the cloud.
Physicists say nothing like this right now. No possibility. But I think we should speculate. You come back at me, but I think we should speculate always. Fantasy, I love sci-fi. But I think the direction you're going in, these fundamental levels of energy, like say pranic energy or something, that kind of stuff. I don't have any idea. The physicists say nothing about it.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you, Layne.